Calling to order this, the 82nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration for the consideration of a briefing on resettlement issues related to Yazidi women and girls. And this is really a follow-up study and to get a check-in with respect to the status of the government operation and its commitment to resettle Yazidis to Canada. And I'm very pleased to welcome officials from the department here today. And thank you for joining us, both from Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, as well as Citizenship and Immigration. And I just begin with thanking you for your public service and also your willingness to come and brief us today on this very important issue. We're going to begin with the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, and it's over to you to decide how to use your time.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to appear before your committee to discuss this important topic and to update the Committee on Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada's work on resettling survivors of Daesh to Canada. Je suis ici aujourd'hui avec Corinne Prince, Directrice Générale.
I am joined today by Corinne Prince, Director General of IRCC Settlement and Integration Policy Branch, and Jean-Marc Gionni, Acting Senior Director of the Resettlement Operations Division. Also joining us are Sean Boyd, the Executive Director for Middle East Relations, and his colleague Tara Carney. My colleagues and I will be pleased to answer any of your questions following my brief opening remarks.
The House of Commons voted unanimously in support of a motion for the Government of Canada to provide protection to Yazidi women and girls who are fleeing genocide. As Canada offers protection on the basis of vulnerability rather than religion or ethnicity, the government's response to this motion focused on all survivors of Daesh for whom resettlement would be an appropriate solution. The government committed to resettling 1,200 survivors of Daesh, including vulnerable Yazidi women and children, by the end of 2017. We have also been prioritizing any applications for privately sponsored refugees who are survivors of Daesh. Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has worked closely with the United Nations Refugee Agency, the International Organization for Migration, Resettlement Assistance Program service provider organizations in Canada, and other partners in order to meet this commitment. The UNHCR has helped us to identify vulnerable Yazidi women and children and other survivors of Daesh and their family members, both inside and outside of Iraq. Mr. Chair, I am happy to report that as of October 29th, 807 survivors have already arrived in Canada, 747 as government-assisted refugees, and 60 as privately sponsored refugees. Of those 807 individuals, 81% are Yazidi, including 230 women, 178 men, and 398 children. Of all the individuals who have arrived in Canada by October 29th, 39% came from Iraq, 35% from Lebanon, and 26% from Turkey. We've identified and interviewed all remaining cases to be resettled. There's 1,383 individuals who've been referred to us, and almost all of them remaining are from Iraq, and the applications are all well in process. Immigration, Réfugiés et Citoyenneté Canadiens.
Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada remains committed to meeting the target of resettling 1,200 survivors of Daesh by the end of the year, notwithstanding the fact that operating in the region is complex and can pose risks to the welfare and safety of the refugees, our partners, and our staff. We continue to monitor recent political and security developments in the region and to assess any possible implications this may have on our operation.
Schedule flights for those whose travel was cancelled in September and October due to the ongoing international flight ban out of the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Although refusal rates are low, arrivals are sometimes delayed for medical, logistical, or other reasons. As we mentioned at the outset of this initiative, we don't want to bring these vulnerable individuals to Canada in large groups, as they need added supports which we want to ensure are in place in the receiving communities. Barring any new emerging security, exit, or transportation considerations beyond our control, we expect to reach our goal of welcoming 1,200 individuals to Canada by December 31st. And in addition to the 1,200 government-assisted refugees that represent the government commitment, We are also facilitating the private sponsorship of individuals who fall within this vulnerable group, so more Yazidi women and girls, as well as other survivors of Daesh, are arriving in Canada as privately sponsored refugees. In choosing where to send new arrivals, we considered the extent to which communities had an existing Yazidi diaspora, adequate medical and psychosocial supports, availability of interpreters, and social service provider organizations with experience with similar population groups. We also took into consideration the advice of Yazidi leaders in Iraq and Canada, who emphasized the importance of connections to the religious community in Canada, allowing for the organic formation of community networks amongst the newly resettled families. À ce jour, la majorité des personnes.
To date, the majority of arrivals under this initiative have been received in Toronto, London, Winnipeg, and Calgary. We anticipate sending individuals and families to Lethbridge as well. Of course, when applicants identify a connection to another location in Canada, all efforts are made to ensure that they are destined to an area where they can be close to family or friends and be able to receive necessary supports.
Organizations with the settlement and integration needs of this population. Migration officers and physicians with the International Organization for Migration identified specific medical and resettlement needs for each individual, and this was shared in advance of their arrival. As well, our department developed and circulated a Yazidi population profile detailing demographic and health characteristics as well as cultural considerations for this vulnerable population. To assist their successful settlement and integration, all government-assisted refugees, including the survivors of Daesh, receive settlement services both pre- and post-arrival. And as such, the International Organization for Migration delivers Orientation to Canada training to all survivors of Daesh before their departure. This orientation provides them with accurate, relevant information and supports so that they can make informed decisions about their new life in Canada, develop realistic expectations, and begin the settlement process. In Canada, IRCC-funded resettlement assistance program service providers play a major role in welcoming the survivors of Daesh and providing transportation centres. Their role is to provide post-arrival services to government-supported refugees to address their immediate and essential needs. Following their initial settlement, the newcomers receive support services from IRCC-funded settlement service providers, including, amongst other things, language training, crisis counselling, and interpretation. There's also targeted services for youth, such as settlement support services in schools, homework clubs, and art and recreation-based activities that are available. The organizations here in Canada have been coordinating and sharing lessons learned amongst themselves, as well as our department, to meet the needs of these newcomers. And in addition, IRCC-funded local immigration partnerships, known as LIPs, are providing support to survivors of Daesh. And these LIPs are playing an important role in facilitating supports during the process of resettling and integrating Syrian refugees. They have partnership networks that aim to coordinate services for newcomers at the local community level by bringing together various stakeholders. And those include employers, school boards, health centers, other levels of government, service provider organizations, professional associations, ethno-cultural and faith-based organizations, and others in the social services sector. Enfin, le ministère surveille les programmes.
Finally, the department also monitors progress in meeting our commitment to the resettlement of these newcomers to Canada. Regular meetings are held at the local level between the department and service providers to address challenges, discuss progress in addressing our commitment and lessons learned, and any other issues that may need attention. We are engaging these organizations again later this week. Mr. Chair, I have provided an overview of where our operation to resettle survivors of Daesh currently stands. My colleagues and I will be happy to answer any questions that committee members might pose and to provide any further details that members request. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to my colleague from Global Affairs.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And next, Mr. Boyd.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair and honourable members of this committee. I've been asked to provide an update on Canada's engagement in Iraq and to outline the current situation in the country. I hope that this will provide some useful context for today's discussion on the Yazidi resettlement program. L'année dernière, mon prédécesseur.
Last year, my predecessor briefed you on the expansion of our diplomatic presence in Iraq. The expansion has allowed Canada to deepen its relations with the government of Iraq and the Kurdish regional government. Our diplomatic staff has regular access to a wide range of interlocutors within the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan regional government. We also have regular interactions with local officials such as governors and mayors, the United Nations, as well as community representatives and civil society organizations.
Live in the northern region of Iraq, in Nineveh province and parts of the Kurdistan region. The two largest communities are in Shekan, northeast of Mosul, and in Sinjar, which is near the Syrian border 80 kilometers west of Mosul, both of which are in the Nineveh province. Following the siege of Sinjar by Daesh in 2014, many Yazidis fled their communities. They ended up in camps or internally displaced persons, or IDPs, in host communities within Iraq, mainly in Dohuk, Erbil, and Sulaymaniyah provinces, or as refugees in other countries like Turkey and Greece. Our increased presence in Erbil has enabled us to engage regularly with different representatives from the Yazidi community and maintain discussions with local authorities and the United Nations. The Office of the Canadian Embassy in Erbil has also provided assistance to IRCC selection teams who have traveled to Iraq to complete the necessary screening of resettlement applicants. Les forces de sécurité.
The Iraqi security forces and Kurdish forces have made significant progress over the past year against Daesh, notably by liberating Mosul and Hawija. The situation across Iraq continues to be fluid, however. Security in parts of the country, including in the Kurdistan region, remains volatile. Global Affairs Canada has recommended that Canadians avoid travel to the country, and we are monitoring the situation to ensure the safety and security of our staff. Iraq will be heading into parliamentary elections in May of 2018. There may be tensions in the lead up to these elections.
Kurdistan regional government held a referendum on independence, despite a ruling by the Supreme Court of Iraq declaring the referendum unconstitutional. The government of Iraq responded by deploying Iraqi security forces to take control of several disputed territories near the borders of the Kurdistan region, including Kirkuk, Sinjar, and areas surrounding Mosul. It also canceled all international flights into the Kurdistan region and took over some border crossings previously controlled by Kurdish authorities. Flight restrictions have made travel in and out of the Kurdistan region more difficult for international visitors, and it is not yet clear when they will be lifted. The Iraqi security forces took over control of these regions without major incident, though a few minor clashes did occur, particularly around Kirkuk. The composition of the Kurdistan government remains uncertain, as do next steps in the ongoing political standoff with Baghdad. Heading into the national elections in 2018, the fundamental differences over constitutional rights and wealth sharing remain unresolved. Mr. Chair, in the fight against Daesh, the Iraqi security forces and with the assistance of the global coalition against Daesh, continue to liberate Daesh's remaining pockets of territory in western Iraq. Daesh's control has been dramatically reduced, now holding less than 10% of the country. Iraqi and international efforts are now increasingly focusing on stabilizing liberated areas and creating an enabling environment for reconciliation. The conflict has created millions of internally displaced persons, with estimates of approximately 400,000 Yazidis living in IDP camps or in host communities. The conflict has also left entire cities and villages in complete ruin. The global coalition has placed immediate priority on clearing these areas of unexploded ordnance and improvised explosive devices and reinstating basic services such as water, electricity, and education where possible. Canada is supporting these efforts, but it will take time, and many Iraqis will require continued humanitarian assistance for the foreseeable future. L'aide humanitaire du Canada est attribuée.
Canada's humanitarian assistance is provided on the basis of vulnerability and needs. Given that Yazidis are a particularly vulnerable group that has been disproportionately affected by Daesh's campaign of violence, they are part of the population supported through our humanitarian assistance. For example, our UN partners are providing comprehensive services in the camps and host communities where Yazidis have sought refuge. This includes food, water, access to education, medical care, and shelter to displaced Yazidis.
The United Nations Population Fund has established a women's center at the Dohuk Hospital, which provides clinical and non-clinical treatment for the most extreme cases of sexual and gender-based violence. Between September 2014 and October 2016, a total of 824 survivors received assistance at this center, including Yazidi women and girls who have suffered atrocities under Daesh. The center continues to function today. In addition, our funding over the past few years to NGO partners has enabled the provision of healthcare services at IDP camps and in communities where many Yazidis are located. Through multi-year programming under Canada's Middle East strategy, we are providing over $150 million in humanitarian assistance to Iraq to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, including the Yazidis. The conflict with Daesh has also exacerbated inter-sectarian divisions and created an environment of distrust amongst communities. Many, including minority groups, fear discrimination or reprisal if they return to their homes. Canada is assisting in stabilization and reconciliation efforts in hopes of creating an enabling environment which will allow internally displaced persons to return home safely. This includes funding the clearance of unexploded ordnance and improvised explosive devices and supporting community-level dispute resolution and reconciliation initiatives. To this end, Canada is supporting anti-retribution campaigns, supporting community action groups focused on addressing potential local conflict, and supporting institutions addressing property and land disputes in northern Iraq. Ultimately, our stabilization efforts are addressing some of the very challenges that enabled Daesh to divide communities in northern Iraq, including traditional Yazidi areas. The Yazidis have suffered horrendous atrocities at the hands of Daesh. The United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic has found these acts of violence constitute genocide. And members of the Yazidi community have told us that they do not feel safe and that they continue to fear Daesh sleeper cells and other forms of religious extremism. Mr. Chair, Canada's resettlement program is assisting the most vulnerable of the community, women and children who have survived inhumane abuses against them. But Canada is also assisting Yazidis and other vulnerable minorities who remain in Iraq. By providing humanitarian assistance and supporting stabilization efforts, we hope that the Yazidi can eventually return to their homes and continue practicing their culture and religion in freedom. Thank you again for the invitation to appear before you today.
Thank you both very much. I'm sure the committee has lots of questions. We begin with Mr. Sarai.
First of all, I want to thank you all. We're all well aware that despite representatives of the previous government having going and seeing the Daesh's brutal attacks on the Yazidi people, the previous government really didn't do anything to help any of the Yazidi people or help in their resettlement. But as soon as the UN declared the attack genocide, this government acted swiftly and quickly, and we're happy that you made arrangements for the commitment and resettlement of 1,200 Yazidi people, and I'm glad to see that that resettlement is on track. I wanted to know, the newcomers to Canada all require specialized and subsidized services based on their unique experiences before they come, and this question is for IRCC. What settlement services are required by Yazidi newcomers that distinguish them from other past and present immigration groups?
So I'll ask my colleague, Ms. Prince, to supplement, but given the extensive trauma that these individuals have survived, including torture, sexual violence, deaths of their family members in front of them, there's a tremendous amount of psychosocial supports that need to be put in place and mental health supports. And so, as I said earlier, we modified the way in which we conduct our interviews and the way in which the medical examinations are done, so we're collecting more relevant information about what are the specific needs, and then that's been passed on to our settlement provider organizations so they can prepare in advance of people's arrival. And our local immigration partnerships have then ensured, working with us, that the settlement supports are actually available, so we don't have gaps in service.
Okay, and how much of the $27.7 million set aside for the resettlement of the Iraqi refugees is allotted for settlement services?
So 27.7 was the amount of money that was set out in budget 2017. We later did an evaluation of the amount of money we thought we would actually need and refined our costing. So what we've asked for is 21.7 million. And I think about 2/3 of that is related to ongoing income support, interim federal health, and the settlement supports that will be available over the next 3-year period.
Okay. And to global services, global affairs, what is the assessment of the environment in Iraq in a post-Daesh world? Do you think some of the Yazidi people will be able to return, and do you think they will return?
Thank you. The post-Daesh Iraq again remains an area that's requiring quite a bit of stability, stabilization support. And so part of our efforts working with coalition members is to engage in stabilization programs to make the community safe. That obviously requires political will on the parts of the community members, but we are providing support through stabilization programs, including policing, to help to develop confidence amongst the communities that they can return safely, deal with issues of demining and unexploded ordnances. This is a very heavily polluted area with munitions, so there's a need to clear those areas and to ensure that restoration of services. So ensure that electricity is flowing, that water, sanitation, that education services are flowing. So that's the focus of the community now, the international community going into this next phase of post-Daesh priority for Iraq, and then based on that, our hope is that community members, including the Yazidis, will feel that they are able to return safely to their communities.
Okay. And in what ways has the Canadian special immigration measure complemented pre-existing aid efforts in Iraq? We assumed that we were giving aid in terms of policing other. And how do you think this special immigration measure to bring 1,200 Yazidis, has it helped in stabilizing the area and helping those people, or?
I think I would answer that in terms of saying that we worked with the regional government of Kurdistan and also the Iraqi government over a targeted program of the 1,200, similar to what Germany had done, and the goal was to identify the most vulnerable who either could not reintegrate back into their communities or could not receive the necessary medical or psychosocial supports that they needed still on the ground in Iraq. And so it was really kind of getting those most vulnerable people out of the difficult situation. I don't know if that had any impact whatsoever in terms of the stability overall of the community.
And would you say this is the largest resettlement of Yazidis or matched with the German model? Is there any other country that has assisted in the resettlement of Yazidi people that you are aware of more than Canada or Germany?
There are a couple of other countries who have been doing resettlement efforts in relation to Yazidi, but I think Canada and Germany are the leaders in terms of the numbers that we've resettled.
Okay. Most Yazidis speak in Northern Kurdish or Kurmajli dialect. What translation interpretation services or resources does IRCC have on hand for Northern Kurdish language?
So we arranged with the International Organization for Migration that when we're interviewing overseas, that we had appropriate translation and interpretation services available. And we continue to work with those translation teams in each of our 5 interview trips. And then equally, post-arrival in Canada, we've been working with the Yazidi communities in our 4 core cities, soon to be 5, to make sure that we have that additional interpretation services available.
And do those 4 or 5 core cities have language available to them and communities, Northern Kurdish or Yazidi communities there that help them assist?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Do they have places of worship for them as well, or is that something being arranged? Or?
No, they do. I mean, when we resettled the 23,000 Iraqis, we actually created pockets of Yazidi diaspora in Canada in those 4 main communities that I mentioned, Toronto, Calgary, Winnipeg, and London. And so we have kind of a core of Yazidis already present from that previous resettlement movement, and that's why we chose those 4 cities and now 5 for the majority of our government-assisted refugees. And so that infrastructure is there in terms of community support, religious community, et cetera.
Very briefly.
Was it easy to extract those that were in northern Iraq, the Yazidi families from there, or was that a challenging environment to select and extract?
Yeah, it's a complex operating environment due to safety concerns for everyone. It's not that complicated to get people out. It's been a bit more complicated now that the international flight situation has been stopped out of northern Iraq, and so we've been finding ways to work around that to continue bringing people to Canada.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rampel.
Thank you. Of the 573 Yazidis that have come to Canada, can you provide, I'm sorry, I don't have much voice. Of the 573 Yazidis that have been brought to Canada, can you please provide the committee with a breakdown based on gender, the city that they've been resettled, and the location that they were identified?
All right, so for the Yazidis that have been part of the resettlement, both for government-assisted and privately sponsored refugees, so far it's actually 650.
Okay. Can you
People
focus
who've
on
been-
the government-sponsored?
Pardon me?
Can you focus on the government-sponsored?
So on the government-sponsored, there's been 590. I think you used 573, so we got 17 more out just recently.
Okay.
And the numbers are 55% are women and girls, and amongst those Yazidis, and 79% are women and children, because we've discovered in interviews that boys have been quite significantly impacted as well.
Sure. And you mentioned the cities. How many in each city have been resettled?
So I have the numbers for the 807, which includes
Could you provide us?
all survivors.
Could you provide committee specifically with the Yazidi component? So how many Yazidis have been settled in each of the cities?
Yeah, we can provide that detail, but so far 642 have gone to, 80% of them have gone to the 4 communities I mentioned.
Okay.
And there have been 165 people who have gone to 14 other communities across Canada.
If you could provide that detail with committee, that would be wonderful. In terms of the intake process, how were candidates identified?
So for the candidate, so there's the cases that have been brought to us by community in Canada of privately sponsored refugees.
Of the government-sponsored
So of the
refugees.
government-sponsored, we've relied on the UNHCR, and the UNHCR on the ground in northern Iraq in particular has worked with the local government, with the regional health authority,
So the
with
UNH
NGOs, with YASDA, et cetera, to identify the groups,
So were
identify the individuals and refer them to us.
So were they, the individuals then didn't have to apply through the regular UNHCR process? They were identified through other means?
I'm not. I think that's true that they were identified through other
Could
means.
you provide the committee
but we'd
with
have to find-
detail on exactly how people were identified and selected? How many? Do you know how many were rejected as part of this process that were identified and rejected?
There haven't been any cases that have been rejected. There have been a few individuals who have actually withdrawn their applications.
Okay. Excuse me. How many Kurmanji translators are currently employed by your department or other government departments as part of the resettlement effort for the Yazidi community?
So they're not our employees, because that's a formal term.
Contracted.
And so what we've relied on is the International Organization for Migration overseas, bringing in the right group
how
of
many?
interpreters. I'd have to find out the number
Can you
for you.
please table
And
that with
similarly,
committee?
in Canada, it's been through our resettlement organizations.
So the number I'm specifically looking for is the number of Kurmanji interpreters that are currently being provided to Yazidi settlers or resettled Yazidis in Canada. How many pending or unprocessed privately sponsored refugee cases are Yazidi or from ethnic minorities in northern Iraq?
So we have, in total, we've had 88 individuals whose cases have been brought forward as privately sponsored refugees.
Yes, so the number
60
that
of those are already in Canada.
So I'm looking for the total number of PSR cases from northern Iraq, I guess, that are in the queue.
Of all nationalities, not just Yazidi.
And have you been starting to break down by ethnicity and or, persecuted minority group, that sort of a thing?
So we did an interview trip into northern Iraq in early October, and at that point we were focusing on Syrians who were government-assisted refugees and privately sponsored refugees.
Sure.
I'd have to look back to see,
So-
and I think we also in the last interview trip did a few privately sponsored refugees,
So
so
just
we'd have to
to-
figure out what the numbers are.
Just to clarify, I guess the information I'd like tabled with committee is the total number of privately sponsored refugee cases that are currently pending from northern Iraq, broken down by ethnicity.
We can certainly get you the total number of privately sponsored refugees. As you know, we don't track by ethnicity, we track by nationality.
So, but you're tracked by ethnicity for this particular case?
We did
that's
track
correct?
by ethnicity because of the specific circumstances of the motion from the House of Commons.
Okay, but you're no longer tracking by ethnicity?
This was exceptional. We virtually never track by ethnicity unless we're specifically requested to do so.
Okay. Has the government requested that you track the privately sponsored refugee cases that are currently pending by ethnicity?
No.
Thank you.
Sorry, other than for the Yazidis.
Okay, but there has been no other request. Okay. I've had reports of people that have been Yazidis that have been resettled in Calgary that they do not have access to the Kermenji translation services 6 months post-settlement, that there's some sort of a 6-month cutoff. Is that correct or no?
I'm certainly not aware of anything of that nature, and I know that we are just moving to, actually, Calgary Catholic Immigration Services is hiring a young woman from Winnipeg who is a Kermenji interpreter, and she wants to move to Calgary to support.
Can you provide the committee with the number of Yazidis who have been resettled who currently do not have access to translation services? It's noted that for some of these women, having Arabic spoken to them as a substitute language is traumatic given their experience. And some of the cases that we've heard anecdotally in my office has been that there are women who do not have access to the translation services 6 months after resettlement, and many of them can't access services because of that, and isolation is becoming a problem. So I would like, in short order, the number of translators that are available to this community, how many of these refugees that have been resettled still have access to translation services, and how many do not. Excuse me. The other component that I'd like to touch on is mental health support for Yazidis, the Yazidi women and others, essentially the entire Yazidi cohort. Can you please table with committee the plan to interact with the provinces to provide specialized mental health support for the Yazidi survivors?
So as I said during my opening remarks, the local immigration partnerships have been helping us very much by making sure we coordinate all the various resources that are available.
Is there a formal plan to provide that information or to provide that service?
I think in each community, the local immigration partnerships have been coordinating everybody and have been planning as they go. I don't know if they have a formal written plan.
So you don't have oversight on that integration support?
We have insight into the integration supports that people have been using. So, but keep in mind that for access to medical services, because the resettled refugees are permanent residents, their primary health care coverage is coming through the province where they've been resettled.
So IRC.
We do have interim federal health
IRC
insurance related to this.
I need to end that there. We're over time. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the officials for coming back to our committee to give us this update. I'd like to actually just follow up a little bit, particularly with the resettlement services for the individuals that have arrived. We know that with the need for particularly counseling support and mental health support, I'm just wondering, in the locations where these individuals have been placed to resettle, do we have any sense in those communities if they are indeed medical service providers, counselors, psychologists, and so on that actually have the language capacity to provide that support to these individuals?
So through the interim federal health program, our translation services are actually paid for by the federal government, and so we arrange in the context of the services that we're reimbursing that translation service is available. And again, working with the community and what the local immigration partnerships have done, we're very conscious of the idea of individuals being able to have appropriate translation. And so we could find more information as to what specific supports they've put in place to make sure that that's available.
If you could, please. And I think that the issue of translation is important because we've also heard from the other study that we did with the Syrian refugee resettlement process. There was a woman who actually told committee that she was diagnosed with cancer, and in fact she did not find out about her diagnosis for a very long time because there was no translation provision provided to her. A stranger standing in the hospital that she recognized spoke the language, she asked that individual to provide the translation, and that's the reality on the ground. So particularly with this group of refugees, I think that the needs are even perhaps even more particular in terms of the language requirements. So I think it's really important that we try to do that. Even if you're funding it, there might not be the resources on the ground. If there's not the resources on the ground, what action is being taken to address that issue? I think that's critical. For the NGOs who are doing this work, are there additional resources provided to them to take on in the helping of the resettlement of the Yazidi families?
Yes, so as Ms. Edlund indicated earlier, there was funding provided for this initiative, and part of that funding goes to the service-providing organizations who are receiving additional government-assisted refugees above what was originally planned at the start of the year.
So that
And we've also provided funding so that each community can hire a wellness coordinator, and also more supports in terms of individualized hand-on supports for each of the families.
And so in terms of those additional resources, did that pocket of money come out of the overall resettlement dollars that's been allocated for resettlement of all refugees and immigrants, or is that an additional measure that was put in by government?
It came out of the $21.7 million that we already had set aside for this specific initiative. It hasn't been touched on from the other pocket of money we have for Vote 10.
So, but this is not additional dollars for the department?
No, sorry, it is additional dollars.
It is additional dollars for the department.
Sorry
Okay.
to not be clear.
Thank you. In terms of housing, because that's the other big issue for resettlement, how large are these families, generally speaking, and how long does it take for an individual who's brought here to resettle in terms of getting permanent housing?
So we were provided advice by the Germans that we should expect very large families, count 10 to 12 people. But in fact, our practical experience is the families, individual nuclear families, are quite small, 2 to 3 people. But what we're finding is that many of the families want their extended family members who are coming also to Canada to all live in the same household. And so we've been looking for housing that would help them do that. So not just mom, dad, 2 kids, but it's also aunts, grandmas, de facto family members, et cetera, that are all housed together.
So for the extended family, are they part of the resettlement process amongst these numbers, or is that another process that they would embark on once they're here?
So what we asked the UNHCR to do when they were referring cases to us was to include the extended family to the extent that they could, so that we could have the entire group come to Canada together as opposed to coming in separate waves.
So that is being done. So that's part of the 1,200 overall.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of the 1,200, beyond this 1,200, given that our immigration levels numbers is at 7,500 for GARS this year, and have you received any direction from the government that beyond this 1,200 for the coming year that you will continue to prioritize this group, or is there been no direction?
So for the 1,200, in my opening remarks, I said that we actually received individuals identified to us. That's 1,383 people. And so we're going to continue processing all of those. So those will be arriving into 2018 over and above the 1,200. We took a targeted approach, as I said earlier, as well, in terms of what the host governments were willing for us to do as a resettlement program, which was not a massive a large resettlement effort. And so that's how we ended up with the number of 1,200. At the moment, we're focusing on finalizing the processing overseas, getting folks here to Canada, getting them adequately supported and resettled. We're looking at if there are any individuals who are family members who were perhaps in captivity and have been released. What are the mechanisms to getting them to Canada quickly to reunite? And that's where our efforts are at the moment. But we have not received new direction, to answer your question, in terms of a further number of individuals to be sought from northern Iraq.
Okay, and so assuming then for the 7,500 levels plan numbers, that would be for all the other different countries, and it would be back to for lack of a better word, business as usual prior to this initiative. Am I correct in making that assumption?
So in the 2018 levels plan, there's 7,500 for government assisted, but there's also 1,500 for the blended cases. So we're operating with a total of government supported of 9,000. Our focus is on, as it has been for a while, and on the Africa and Middle East.
I see. Thank you. For the children, and so
About 15 seconds.
special support for the children, especially psychiatry and mental health support, is that part? Can you also provide us information with respect to that and to break that down for us?
Thank you very much. Ms. Zahid, I understand you're Mr. Tabara are doing it together.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the officials for coming to the committee. My first question is for you, Ms. Edlin. And first, before I start, I want to thank you for your leadership on the Syrian operation. And we'll go from there. So are there any lessons that you learned from the Syrian operation that were successfully applied to this specific program?
Yeah, so, sorry, I should say yes instead of yeah. So what we looked at in terms of what we learned from the Syrian operation and applied it here is firstly about pacing of arrivals to make sure that the communities where these people are being resettled to are able to welcome them fully. Secondly, we instituted the changes I talked about earlier about providing further information of what specific settlement needs are to the service provider organizations in the communities where people will resettle, so ahead of time people would know what is going to happen. We also know from the Syria project that people need a certain period of time to settle their affairs and say goodbye to folks. And in the case of Yazidis, they have a special religious service that they need to do. They have to take a trip to, I think it's called Lalish, and to receive a blessing for their departure. And so we've made sure that we've covered that piece as well.
How important was the role of the partners, such as the UNHCR, YESDA, and Operation ISRA, to the success of this program?
It's been key on a number of different levels for YASDA and Operation Ezra, as well as NGOs on the ground in northern Iraq, providing us with their intelligence, their collaboration, their information about how to make this be a success. That has been really key to helping us set up the operation in the first place and make adjustments as we go. And the UNHCR, as always, is a key partner for us, and to recognize that they stepped out of their normal role in relation to this operation to do referrals of internally displaced persons as opposed to refugees themselves. That's not normally their legal mandate, but they recognize that given the vulnerability of individuals in this particular set of circumstances, they would go the extra mile to refer internally displaced people.
I know we normally don't ask the refugees to identify themselves by religion, and I understand many Yazidis are reluctant to identify themselves as Yazidis. So could you discuss how you are able to report the numbers that you have provided and the challenges you faced around that?
So in terms of the individuals that we've been counting as Yazidi, it's people who have self-identified and who have come through the UNHCR referral process as Yazidi. So I'm not aware of the folks that have been referred to us of any other group of people who didn't want to identify themselves. I'm not aware of that being a particular challenge. But we have the numbers we have because people self-identified.
I'll pass my rest of my time to Mr. Tabara.
Thank you. My question is the situation that started arising with the conflict in northern Iraq, a big portion of why the atrocities first started was when the Yazidis were forced to leave from their homes and were forced on Mount Sinjar, where roughly around 40,000 Yazidis were trapped there, and that was August 2014. Can you tell the committee, since from August 2014, that incident till August 2015, how many Yazidis were settled within Canada?
From August 2014 forward?
Yes, till August 2015, within that year time frame.
August 2015. Okay, let me just make sure I've got the right year.
You can just
set.
table that. I'll go into another.
Yeah, I mean,
another
part of it
question.
is, it will be difficult because until we started this specific operation for resettling Yazidis, we did not identify people by ethnicity or religion. And so we know from our 23,000 resettlement of Iraqis, we ended up resettling Yazidis, and that's how we ended up with the core communities here in Canada. So those were created, but we didn't set out to create them by specific ethnicity or religion.
Okay. My second question is for Mr. Boyd. You mentioned about post-Daesh and that some of the programs that we want to put in place to help those communities that are suffering from lack of water, electricity, etc. And we know that Daesh has now been decreased to around 10% control in certain regions. So can you tell us about some of the programs that you're putting in place for post-Daesh or what you've been working with multilateral organizations?
Okay, thank you. The stabilization phase is we're focusing very closely on rehabilitation of local communities. So working with organizations like the UNDP in terms of their stabilization programming. So we're contributing funding to that. We're part of that stabilization working group that's looking at how we can restore services in these local areas. We are also involved in transitional justice programming. So how to work with organizations to collect evidence of crimes against humanity and crimes against international law, building case files that can be used in due course for, again, allowing communities to begin to heal and address the issue of accountability. And thirdly, in areas of reconciliation and conflict prevention. So working with local organizations, programming to ensure that women's voices are engaged in the process and helping to rebuild a sense of community, to rebuild these shattered communities.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, is there any more time left?
You have about 40 seconds.
40 seconds, okay. So I just maybe elaborate on that, just about the confidence within the community. What type of things can we, these communities have lived alongside each other for many years. Yes, there has been some conflict, but I don't think much to this large scale of conflict. Is there more programs put in place to bring in that confidence of many different ethnic groups there?
Well, one key area that our programming is focusing on is policing. So starting to introduce the concept of civilian policing. And so the plan is that Canada will deploy up to 20 Canadian police officers. We have about 5 that have now been deployed into Iraq. We'll be deploying more. To start introducing concepts like community policing that we know here in Canada, how the police can work with community members to develop that trust and confidence in institutions at the community level.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Ms. Rempel for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair. Just going back to my previous line of questioning, has the government directed IRCC to provide or develop any plans to provide specialized mental health services for these EDs who have been resettled, sort of anything that would be in the vein of what the Germans did in terms of providing specialized mental health services for these people? So,
Of course, the health provision is a matter for the provinces, not for the federal government, and so within our sphere of jurisdiction, we've made sure for the interim federal health program that we have adequate resources available and the medical services available.
That's a comment that would be writ large. For this particular cohort, has the government or directed the department to provide any sort of plan to provide specialized mental health services to Yazidi genocide victims?
I'm not sure it was a question of direction, Mr. Chair, but rather a recognition from everything we learned from the Germans and others that we had to make sure that those types of supports were available and then working collaboratively with the provinces and the territories so that our programming is complementary.
So a case that was presented through a resettlement service provider to me in Calgary said the following. The adult mother is receiving trauma counseling related to her kidnapping and extensive sexual abuse. She frequently says she is crazy and cannot cope. She says she's consumed by the thoughts of her past and finds herself unable to learn. She also says her daughters are crazy and they are not coping well with the violence they have experienced. The girls have formed no meaningful friendships and cannot communicate their feelings well. There are deep hostilities towards Muslim men that often come to the surface when they interact with Arabic-speaking men. They frequently say Arabic bad and become agitated, causing many misunderstandings and further isolating them as they live in an area with large Arabic population. She goes on to talk about how there essentially isn't mental health services that are being provided specifically to deal with the trauma that these women have seen in their captivity. Can you provide the committee with any details on this, like, specific, perhaps specialized mental health support that would be provided to these women? Because I think that there are probably some gaps.
Yes, we can do so. Corinne, do you have something you'd like to say now?
Thank you. I would just add that, particularly to the situation in Calgary, the local service provider organizations are working extremely closely, more than ever actually, with the local health authorities, not only in terms of mental health, but even as a specific example, ensuring that the local paramedic teams understand the issues that this particular population is dealing with and can adjust the services they are offering to ensure that they're dealing with
the mixed message here, because
deep
you're
issues
saying that there's not an oversight, but Ms. Prince, your testimony seems to suggest that there is oversight. So I'm just wondering what's fact here. What I'm looking for is whether or not the department has been instructed by the government to provide some sort of a plan for specialized mental health support for these women, and what you're doing to implement that. And is it the province? Are you actually working with them? And can you table with the committee any sort of plan?
Well, our settlement policies require our service provider organizations to provide, and especially with the additional funding that's been provided for this particular population.
I'll ask another way, sorry, and just for time. What metrics for mental health recovery is IRCC using within this cohort to determine whether or not their mental health needs have been appropriately met?
So I can speak specifically to what we've seen in the interim federal health program context.
Just because I'm out of time, would you be able to table those metrics with committee?
Yep. So up to now, there's not been a large number of individuals who have received individualized counseling.
How many have received individualized counseling?
It would be less than 5.
Sorry.
People who have come to individualized counseling. But what the Canadian Mental Health Association has told us in situations like this, you have the initial euphoria when people arrive in Canada, and then their mental health needs resurface kind of 6 to 24 months in. So partially these people are getting services from the provinces and territories, partially coming to us, and then we do have the amount of money, the amount of 50 individuals who have accessed IFH services for medications that are related possibly to mental health supports.
590 Yazidis,
I need to
have
cut you
accessed.
off there, Ms. Rampel. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I get time for Mr. Fajascatos for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here today. My colleague, Mr. Tabara, asked about numbers, the number of those that were able to enter, Yazidis that were able to enter Canada from the summer of 2014, when the real violence targeting Yazidis emerged in the area around Sinjar over the course of the next year. What is known on this comes from an audit that shows that 3 Yazidis, in fact, entered Canada over that period of time. Details about this were revealed in reports that emerged in July 2016, so just 3 individuals. On that point, in fact, a question for IRCC. Did the previous government express any interest with your department about admitting Yazidis into Canada, beginning in August 2014 when the devastating violence emerged in the Sinjar region of northern Iraq?
Yes, so certainly my recollection is there were discussions at the time in terms of exploring the situation, exploring what could be done in response to the situation.
But I'm talking about putting in place a focused plan of resettlement.
Again, there were discussions in terms of as the situation was evolving. We were asked to look at the situation. Was the time right for resettlement? How would resettlement
I'm sorry,
work?
was the time right for a resettlement?
Well, in terms of
when we know that thousands of people were fleeing, that they were trapped in mountains without access to water, in conditions where the temperature ranged between 40 degrees Celsius and up to 50 degrees Celsius, there was still these preliminary discussions to see if things if it was appropriate, basically.
So perhaps misspoke there. In terms of resettlement, it's
you didn't misspeak. The previous government didn't act correctly, but you didn't misspeak.
So resettlement is not always the first and immediate response to a humanitarian crisis. The first and foremost is looking after the safety and the security of the individuals. The UNHCR steps in and looks to find durable solutions for the individuals, protection in the country or in a country of asylum, and eventually the discussion turns to, is there a need for resettlement out of the region for some individuals?
And did it move along this path? Was any concrete plan put forward by the government with your department? It doesn't sound like that.
So the plan that was ultimately put in place was announced as a follow-up to the unanimous motion in Parliament and announced in February 2017.
Right.
But there was the resettlement of Iraqis who were outside of Iraq, a commitment of 23,000 that we did over the course of several years under the previous government. And that did, as I said earlier, we didn't know it because we don't track it, that did bring Yazidis to Canada.
I'm talking about emphasis on Yazidis by the previous government, because we've seen the opposition after the most recent election, for example, proclaim a real interest in the persecuted minority that are the Yazidis, but I want to see where the facts actually lie. Another question about federally supported services that are available to those Yazidi newcomers that have come. Ms. Edlund, you talked about the interim federal health program. Could you expand on that and tell us exactly about the program and how Yazidis can access it, what benefits are available?
So this is the same as what's available for all resettled refugees. We have the programming in place for resettlement, which involves income support over the period of a year. There's another program called the Joint Assistance Sponsorship, where for particularly vulnerable families, that income support can be extended to a 2-year period. So that's income support. And then we have interim federal health, which is in relation to these individuals, because they're permanent residents, it's a top-up to what they would get under normal provincial health services.
I don't mean to interrupt. There's just time constraints, that's all. How critical is this to their transition in terms of integration? And can you speak to it from even a values-based perspective? How important is this program?
Interim federal health in particular?
Yes.
Okay, so...
And refugee access to it.
What we know for this particular group of people is that 636 people have actually accessed interim federal health services. The highest number of services have been in relation to medications and to vision care.
So it would be irresponsible for a government to cancel that access, correct?
That would be the government choice at the time.
Fair enough.
I need to end there. I'm sorry. We've come to the end of our first hour, and I want to thank again the officials for being with us. I want to especially thank Ms. Edlund, not only for today, but for your ongoing work in these last many months in your role in operations, and it really has been a daunting task. We can tell that. You will be back at the committee again, and you go with our thanks and our respect for all your work on this file and the other files. So thank you. We'll take a brief pause as we break for our next witnesses. On va commencer encore.
We'll get started again.
And very pleased to welcome from the UNHCR our Canadian representative, the representative in Canada, rather, Monsieur Jean-Nicolas Buz. Welcome, and again to the committee.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To this committee to speak about the situation of the survivor of ISIS who have been relocated to Canada. I would like first to thank Canada for having offered this opportunity for UNHCR to work with the Iraqi authorities and the Canadian authorities for the relocation of the most vulnerable survivor of Daesh. In particular, we have been working very closely in Iraq, both with the central government in Baghdad, but also the authorities in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. In particular, three departments: the Department of Public Health, which, as you have heard, is supported by another UN agencies in providing support to victims of sexual violence. The Directorate of Combating Violence Against Women, which is co-chairing with UNHCR the protection working group in Kurdistan, and the Directorate of Labor and Social Affairs, which is primarily concerned with working with children. We had a common objective with Canada, and as mentioned earlier, with Germany, we also provided a number of relocation space. The common objective was to identify the most vulnerable survivor of Daesh who could not survive or who needed specific treatment which was not available in Kurdistan where they were living, and therefore we worked with all the partners to identify in a safe and dignified manner those survivors. We one key element of all those relocation and resettlement programs are really to ensure the dignity of the people concerned and their freedom of choice, for them to be informed about what relocation or resettlement entails, and ultimately it's very much the decision of the individual to leave a country to be resettled or relocated to a country like Canada. It is outside our traditional legal mandate to do relocation of persons who are still within the boundaries of their own country, but we have done that in exceptional cases when we were not able to provide assistance and protection to the people concerned. We have primarily focused on survivors of sexual violence, women and girls, but as mentioned earlier, we need also to recognize that violence of a sexual nature has been exercised against men and boys as well. Persons who had been held captive by Daesh for a prolonged period and subjected to forced religious conversion, physical and psychological torture and abuse, risk of trafficking, forced labor, and people who had been separated from their families. In doing so, we also reach out to our partners on the ground to get referrals, not only from the three directorates I mentioned, so Public Health, Social Affairs, and the Directorate to Combat Violence Against Women, but also to our partners, the NGOs, not only in Iraq, but also in Canada. I personally met a number of NGOs who were showing interest in providing us with list of names. As a result, 4 NGOs in Canada have submitted names. It's the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, the Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, the Canadian Lutheran World Relief, and the Office of Refugees of the Archdiocese of Toronto. They have submitted altogether 34 names, out of which 18 were already in the database of the Kurdish authorities and therefore in the database of UNHCR. So they provided altogether an additional 16 names which were presented to the Canadian authorities. I would like to make a point which is a little bit outside the purview of this study, but as you well know, the resettlement or relocation addresses only the most vulnerable cases, and it's usually less than 1% of the refugee population. And I want to note our worries regarding the funding for the operation in Iraq. As we speak, at the end of our fiscal year, which is end of December, we have received less than 20% of the funding required to assist more than 4 million displaced, including among those displaced a large number of people who have been subjected to abuse by Daesh. So I'm making this one because while we do very much appreciate the opportunity to relocate the most vulnerable, we need also to be able to provide assistance and protection to the people who are still in Iraq, including in Kurdistan, including victims and survivors of Daesh. And with only 18% of our budget, that makes our life extremely, extremely complicated. And that's our problem, but it's really make the survival and the protection assistance that we can offer to the displaced extremely limited. So I will stop there, and I will be happy to get questions from members of the Parliament.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ananda Sangri to begin for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Jean-Nicolas.
I know it was mentioned by our officials as well that this is a unique scenario in which we're looking at IDPs, but this is not the first time this has come up. How does UNHCR manage kind of an amendment to the mandate with respect to protection of vulnerable, where it doesn't necessarily meet the conventional definition under the Convention of Refugees?
Those relocation programs, to distinguish them from resettlement, which are for refugees which are outside their country of origin, we very much need the approval and the collaboration of the authorities on the ground, which have to allow that their own citizens be relocated for protective measures outside their own country, their country of origin. And as you mentioned rightly, this has been done in the past. So we did it recently with the survivor of Daesh. We have a program, for example, in Central America, where we are doing exactly the same thing for El Salvador, for in particular, women and children subjected to sexual violence in El Salvador and Honduras who are identified from within their own country, relocated temporarily to Costa Rica, and then sent mainly to the United States for their protection needs.
And you had mentioned that of the most vulnerable represent about 1% of the overall refugee population or the IDP population.
The most vulnerable represent 10% of the refugee population, but we are only able to relocate and resettle 10% of those 10%, so which make 1% of the total number of refugees.
Okay, so you're suggesting that there's a great number of people that are still who are highly vulnerable, but who are not, who we are unable to resettle.
Throughout the world, we have more than 22 million refugees. We have identified 1.2 million of them who are in need of resettlement, and out of them, we will be able this year to resettle less than 90,000, mainly to the United States, Canada, and Australia.
So can you give us a sense of, I know you've spoken to some of the agencies in Canada, you've probably even met with some of the new arrivals. Can you give us a sense as to how they're faring in integrating in the last few months since they've arrived?
I'm pleased to do so with a disclaimer that UNHCR is not involved in the services which are being provided upon relocation to Canada. Having said that, I was myself at the airport in Winnipeg when I welcomed Ahmad, this child who had been separated for years from his mother, who had been relocated to Canada through this program. And I was able then to see the support that the community, the Yazidi community in particular, but other group, settlement agencies were able to provide to those families in terms of integration, the support they were receiving from psychosocial to their daily life in terms of navigating their new environment. So it's positive. As it was mentioned by IRCC previously, and we see that in all situations, there's a period of enthusiasm and of good and positive energy, which always at some point goes a little bit in kind of a low, I don't know how you say that. Yeah, but people in the end, and we have all the statistics available here and elsewhere, after a certain period of time, catch up and become full member of the society and productive member of the society. So we have no particular concern that this specific category will not, like other refugees resettled to Canada, will not strive.
And with respect to resettlement, right now it's Germany and Canada that are primarily the focus of resettlement. How do we get more countries engaged, especially on the Yazidi community resettlement? What can we do? What does Canada need to do to kind of have more of a multilateral engagement on this?
I'm not sure that the prioritization of the need will be necessarily for the relocation of an additional number of survivors of Daesh. As I mentioned just earlier on, our main concern is the fact that we have 4.2 million displaced persons in Iraq. We have more than 250,000 Syrian refugees which are in Iraq as we speak, and we have only 1/5 of the money which is required to help them. Resettlement is really, and relocation, as it was the case here, is only for a very small percentage of the population. In addition, I would say for UNHCR, it's important that we do not focus on a particular country of origin or a particular ethnic group, but very much that we prioritize the needs of those 1.2 million people I already identify in our database and who need a resettlement, out of which 9,000 will come to Canada, 9,000 out of 1.2 million. And therefore, what we need to keep is the space for all other refugees who need, as a matter of survival, we have heard of the issues of cancer, medical treatment, who need this solution in Canada and elsewhere. So I will not necessarily indicate a wish for further relocation of survivors of ISIS, Daesh.
And I guess just to conclude, have you, with respect to those who are who've been referred, you mentioned 34 people have been referred through the different partners here, different organizations. What is their basis of connection with those who those 34? Like, what is their rationale for the referral?
Mainly was extended family members that they knew of in need of such a relocation program.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rempel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell us how many Yazidi are currently residing in UNHCR-sponsored camps?
We don't do a breakdown by ethnic groups.
Okay.
We never do. We will be looking really at the vulnerabilities such as persons with disability, elderly, children.
And I'll be brief because I don't have a lot of time. The motion that Parliament unanimously adopted focused on much more than resettlement. It focused on other recommendations that were developed in the June 2016 report they came to destroy. So one of the motions that we adopted to support was Section 213. It recommended that a clearly understood reporting system for harassment and crimes committed against the Yazidis in camps be established. Has this been done in UNHCR camps?
In all UNHCR camps and outside the camp, because a number of displaced are living within the communities, we have mechanisms for not only the displaced and the refugees to complain, but also other service providers to complain against any mismanagement and mishandling of the cases, and it's throughout the world. I had the pleasure to write to this committee not so long ago to explain that in detail, what are the mechanisms.
How many complaints have been made by Yazidis?
We don't break down this information through it by ethnic group, so I will not be able to respond, and nobody will be able to respond.
So to be clear, the UN report said to set up a clearly understood reporting system for harassment and crimes committed against the Yazidis in camps, but you don't track complaints made by this group. Is that correct?
It's correct, because we don't do the breakdown, and we don't ask people to identify themselves as belonging to a certain ethnic group or religion. We will look at the complaints and investigate the complaints. The investigation is not done by the staff in Iraq. It's done by a special team which comes from Geneva.
So you can't tell me how many complaints have been made through that process by Yazidis?
By Yazidi? No, I cannot.
Okay. So you can't, and you also can't tell me how many Yazidis are located in your camp for the same reason.
Exactly.
So has the government of Canada asked the UNHCR to prioritize Yazidis or other ethnic groups beyond the special initiative, for example, going into the 2018 tranche of government-sponsored refugees? And are there any plans by the UN to prioritize Yazidis within the 2018 tranche of government-sponsored refugees on your list?
Canada, like other countries, has asked UNHCR to prioritize cases which are falling within the global resettlement criteria, which have been adopted by all the countries.
So that would be no. There's been no special direction for additional identification of Yazidis or other persecuted groups from northern Iraq.
As you know, this is not the way we function in terms of resettlement. We look really
yes. I know. I'm just asking for yes or no. Thank you. How were the Yazidis that were that were included in the special project identified by the UNHCR?
So they were identified by the 3 directorates that I mentioned, because that's the service provider, and it's through the medical care and the psychological attention that those people can be identified as in need of services which are not available in Kurdistan for the time being, and who need, as a result, to be resettled to another country. In addition, NGOs on the ground, which are operating in the communities, and NGOs in Canada, as I mentioned, were also encouraged to provide names for us to go to these people, identify their need, and look at whether they will fit the criteria to be resettled.
What is the average wait time for a secondary interview to become listed on a UNHCR list that would come to Canada? So between the first interview and the second interview, somebody that's applying.
You mean in this specific instance?
Let's say, using as a baseline one of the camps that the Yazidis would have been located in.
Between a couple of weeks and a couple of months.
Thank you. So in July 2016, this committee undertook a study on internally displaced persons, et cetera. We had evidence from someone named Mr. Mirza Ismail that read as followed. I have evidence of some of the UN papers with me, as I'm willing to show anybody. He's suggesting that there was discrimination against Yazidis. And he said, it's the UN papers at the initial meeting. They give a certain amount of months or years. How long? I asked, how long is the wait? For example, we have some families who are waiting, and their next appointment is on July 7th, 2022. I was incredulous, so I asked if he had any evidence to that fact, and he said, yes, I have it with me. Would you be willing to table it with committee? And he did. So how is it possible that members of the Yazidi community are experiencing wait times that long when you're saying it's between 1 and 2 weeks?
We have 1.2 million people who have been identified for resettlement throughout the world, and we have been given by countries only 90,000 space. So you can imagine why there is so much delays.
So
90,000 cases for 1.2 million which have been identified.
In this specific instance, Mr. Ismail, and this evidence was presented to our committee over a year ago, said most of the problem is that most of the UN staff, as Sister Nadia said, the UN is not helping because most of the UN staff are Muslims and they don't like us. Unless we lie to ourselves, they don't like us. They don't treat us equally. Was this case investigated by the UN?
Was this case put in a complaint form to the UN?
When I met with your staff, when they came to my office, I did raise this testimony.
All the investigation is confidential. It's done by our oversight team in Geneva, and staff members are not privy to the result. But the person concerned will receive the result of the investigation.
So how many similar investigations have been raised in terms of Yazidis?
In terms of Yazidis?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to come back to my earlier response. We don't disaggregate population of concern to UNHCR by their ethnic origin.
Okay. Has there been any effort by the UN or any special measures to reduce discrimination against either Yazidis or other persecuted minorities heading to UNHCR camps in instances such as this?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, I don't think there is any discrimination against Yazidi or other minorities by UNHCR or partner staff. And when there is allegations, those allegations are taken seriously and investigated.
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I am wondering, you mentioned that you have limited resources at the UNHCR to do your work, which I don't doubt. With respect to Canada's contribution to your resources, could you advise the committee how much does Canada provide to the UNHCR to assist us with the refugee initiative?
This initiative,
yes.
Specifically, most of our funding from Canada is thankfully unearmarked. So we receive core funding for our operation, which allows us the flexibility to allocate the funding where the needs are for our operation. So I will not be protection work, support through psychosocial or medical. Most of the money will come from this unearmarked funding. And Canada this year has provided to UNHCR globally 108 million of Canadian dollar.
Okay, so that's...
So it's not, we ask Canada not to earmark the funding to specific program.
So it's $108 million for all of the work that you do for Canada related to the any of the refugee...
66 million displaced people.
Correct. And so, but particularly with respect to this initiative, there are no additional dollars provided to you.
This initiative, no, it came under the money that is unearmarked or earmarked just at the country level, but that will be for any of the interventions that we are doing throughout Iraq, not specifically Kurdistan.
Okay. In terms of that allocation, the $108 million, how much, if any, is being provided to the individuals on the ground in terms of the supports that they need at the camps?
You have 5 hours.
Well, maybe
it's very. I mean, it's very complicated because we have different programs. So let's say that we have a program of cash. 97% of the money will go straight into the the hand of the refugees or the displaced. But if you look at, for example, relocation, we need to do the registration of the
I wonder,
individuals.
Sorry, because we have limited time, so I apologize for interrupting, but I wonder whether or not then you can submit to the committee a breakdown of the $108 million Canadian dollars for the allocation and where it goes. And so what administrative, direct aid to X camps, which camp, et cetera, just so that we have a sense.
Okay, no,
because I certainly don't know how it works.
The administrative costs are
useful.
between 13 and 17%, depending on which operation.
Yeah, so if we could get a breakdown, that would
It's
be great.
13-17%, and the rest is entirely going to intervention to support on protection and assistance the refugees and the displaced.
Okay. And is there a breakdown for which camp that those dollars are allocated to? Can we get that detailed information as well?
There's a detail not by camp, but by country.
Okay, by country. Okay, even by country would be useful for us, and so that we get a sense of it. So moving forward, in terms of, I guess, the 2018 service levels plan that we have, because at this point we're at 7,500 GARs for Canada. Will you be getting additional dollars for the 2018 budget from the government to assist with this work, or is that 108 million covering future years as well? And maybe you can tell us the period in which the $108 million is meant to cover.
So last year, IRCC gave us specifically, this year, sorry, IRCC gave us specifically $4 million to go into resettlement programs throughout the world, not specifically out of Iraq or for survivors of Daesh. And we are in negotiation with IRCC to see whether they can extend this financial support next year.
I see.
So the 4 million are different from the 108 million that we received from Global Affairs.
I see. So that is in addition to.
But it's not specific to this program that we are discussing today. It's for all resettlement programs.
Okay. Are there any additional dollars then beyond the 108 and the $4 million to which you received? No. Okay. So the $4 million is for the resettlement of last year's numbers. Sorry, this year's numbers. So next year you don't have a figure just yet.
No.
And I guess you won't get that until after Budget 2018, assuming. And once you do, could you provide us with that information so then we're aware of it? In terms of other countries, I'm curious, how often do you get specific requests from other countries with special measures, such as the one in which we're talking about right now with the Yazidis?
Very rarely.
Okay.
Because countries have adopted some global resettlement criteria which guide our work to make this unique solution carried out in a very fair and non-subjective manner according to the need of the people.
All right. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the budget issue. So this year you got $4 million. How much did you get for the Yazidis initiative from the government? Did you get any additional dollars from the government? Zero. From IRCC, zero.
For the identification and the referral of the cases, no, but it's part of this overall envelope that we receive from IRCC for all our resettlement and relocation programs.
Okay. Was the UNHCR involved with Germany?
Yes.
With their Yazidis initiative? Yes. So was that one example of where a special measure or special undertaking was what was taking place with Germany, and so that's one example?
Yeah.
Okay. So whenever a genocide has been declared, is it the experience of the UNHCR to get special requests from countries to participate or to be involved in? No.
No. Let me point out here something that you, all honorable members of the committee, know. Whether you are a rape victim as part of a genocide or a rape victim as part of any other conflict, you are a rape victim. And if that person needs to be resettled because, sorry to be a bit descriptive here, as a fistula that cannot be treated in Eastern DRC, it's not because she's not part of a genocide that we will not prioritize these victims to come to Canada or another country to be treated.
Thank you very much. I need to end there. This goes now to Mr. Whalen and Mr. Tabar. Mr. Whalen beginning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Buza. Does the UNHCR consider the genocide against the Yazidis to be ongoing?
UNHCR does not make that kind of qualification. It will be another part of the UN. The Security Council can make that kind of assessment. To some extent, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights can make that kind of assessment, in particular through the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, but UNHCR does not qualify the type of atrocities that people are subjected to. We look at the needs.
Okay, great. So just wanted to help you clarify the fact that your programs are not based on whether or not a genocide is occurring against a group. It's provided based on their refugee status.
On the refugee status or the displaced status and the nature of the needs that the person has.
In terms of resettlement, you were mentioning that UNHCR maintains statistics on how displaced peoples are doing when they're resettled into different countries. How are the refugees that have been resettled into Canada over the last 2 years been doing compared to refugees that are being resettled in other countries? Is Canada doing a good job on intake of refugees?
So just a clarification, we do not maintain statistics because we are not involved with the resettlement or the settlement services. This is very much done by civil society, the federal and the provincial authorities. But we are aware of a number of studies undertaken by those partners, but also by academics, which shows that indeed the integration of resettled refugees in Canada is exemplary.
Okay. In terms of the particular population that we're focused on, people who have been displaced by Daesh, and it seems to be that the priority is to help them stay in situ, close to their communities, and then return to their communities. What other factors beyond access to medical conditions might give you guys concern that these people do need to be moved to a separate country? Is there specific targeting? Could they be at additional or heightened risk due to other factors that aren't medical?
Children born out of wedlock of women who had been held captives by Daesh are particularly at risk of reprisal from their own family, unfortunately, and from their own communities. So because of the so-called shame which has been brought to the family of having a female member of the family having been raped. Those will be a case that we will consider resettlement, so that the person is not under, or the family is not under the social pressure from the rest of the community to eliminate those children.
I'm getting the sense from some of the testimony today that we're starting to reach the end of the untapped demand for people to be relocated to Canada and to Germany for this purpose. Is that in fact the case, or do you see that this is an ongoing, continual demand, and Canada and Germany will be continually called upon to take a certain small percentage of displaced peoples for this special type of protection?
No, we are very grateful to Canada and Germany to have offered this possibility. But let's keep in mind that those situations are constantly evolving. People are being released from captivity. People who were afraid of coming to the service provider with a specific story or of a specific needs after a certain period of time may come out and request additional assistance. So it's difficult to ascertain whether there will, at this point in time, whether there will be additional needs for a similar program.
And before I hand the time over to Mr. Tabera, in terms, Turkey is doing a lot of work to help, support displaced people in the region. Can the people that were looking to resettle to Germany and Canada receive a comparable level of support and protection in camps in the region, such as camps in Turkey?
we are doing our maximum efforts to provide this support in the camp and in the host communities. But again, it's all a question of the amount of funding that we are receiving.
Mr. Tabera?
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. My question relates to kind of identification and how you decide who the most vulnerable groups are. But before I talk about that, I just want to let members of the committee know, and yourself through the chair, is that it's important not to confine people in certain boxes, whether by sex, religion, or ethnicity. This causes a lot of problem, and I'll let you elaborate on that. And I understand that there's been complaints, maybe from a certain minority group, as in maybe Yazidis, other minority groups. But it's important to understand that maybe if a family identifies as Christian, Yazidi, or Muslim, maybe the children or extended family members may not identify as that. And you mentioned when you were asked that you look at a complaint as a complaint, and it's not specific to a certain religion or ethnicity. And I want you to elaborate on why the importance of that is.
And I will go, thank you very much for this question, because it allows me to go back to this global resettlement criteria, which is at the core of our program. We are looking at whether the person has the capacity, the abilities, and is receiving the services to survive in the first country of asylum, or in his or her own country when it's internally displaced people. And we have identified certain categories which are more at risk of not being able to survive in their exile. It's rape victims, torture survivors. It's people who are at risk of being detained and sent back to their country of origin, where they may be at risk of persecution. It's children at risk. It's women at risk. I can take an example of a widow with several children who will have difficulties to survive economically and who may be forced to resort to survival sex as a way to feed her children. So the categories are very limited, and it's on this basis and not on the basis of, as you rightly mentioned, sex, religion, or ethnic origin or linguistic minorities that we look at the vulnerabilities. It's the same when we are looking at complaints that we receive about our own staff or our partner staff discriminating against a certain person.
In terms of your own staff, how do you identify if someone, if there's people been having complaints and that some people say that the UN staff are mostly Muslim? How do you identify if they're mostly Muslim? And are they discriminating against people, or there's no measure for that?
In all our operation, we disseminate information on where people can complain. They can complain online. We have complaint box in the camps, in the health center, in the community center, in the registration center. We have text message, video, which are disseminated throughout the refugee and displaced community so that people are empowered. Plus, the senior staff also exercise oversight on our own staff, and we have our many partners, NGOs, including Canadian NGOs, who are also providing information when things are not carried out in line with our mandate.
Thank you very much. Mr. Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation today as well. Pleasure to meet you. I just wanted to go back a little bit and just see what you're relying on. You've talked about 1.2 million people, I believe it is, sort of is that up or down from what we've had in the past?
It's up.
Yeah.
It's up because we have never seen so many refugees and displaced since World War II.
And obviously, part of the United Nations Independent International Commission on the Inquiry for Syrian Arab Republic is part of that reason. I mean, they've identified it as genocide, and so that puts an awful lot more people trying to be resettled. Identifies them for you?
Yes, but like the more than 3 million internally displaced in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the...
Yeah.
What I want to specify, no more than any other victims from any other conflict or individualized persecution.
Yes. And you mentioned 66 million people as well worldwide. And Now, you're saying, though, I think one of your comments was that there's, or one of the comments I heard earlier, that there's 1% are impacted persons. Is that of the 1% of the 66 million?
So, no, we are looking at the refugee population, which has 22 million. The 66 is both refugees and internally displaced. So if you look at the refugees, we have identified 1.2 million who, because they are rape victim, torture survivor, women at risk, children needs to be resettled. 1.2 million, and we will be able to resettle much less than 10%. It's going to be 8%, actually.
So I just wonder if you receive persons based on the receiving country's ability to supply certain supports. Having gone through the genocide that many of these women and children have, I would say that they're into a situation of extreme trauma. I guess that might be cover words for, being polite about rape and torture. Can you just indicate to us then why, with the expertise you have, that more of those people, particularly in, as you say, this is a special case with the Yazidis, or why others haven't been identified and sent to particular areas? I mean, they're all going worldwide. Canada, U.S., and Australia particularly, you mentioned. Are they being sent there on our ability of these countries to provide the mental stability, the mental training, and the mental work that they need to do with the people that have been struck by this genocide?
You mean specifically to Canada rather than another country?
Well, yeah, I'm just saying those three countries versus others, or
all the countries,
what's the criteria?
Yeah. No, all the countries which have a resettlement program, and there are very few, because I think there are less than 20 countries in the world which are doing or some 20 countries which are doing resettlement, have all similar capabilities and capacities and in terms of service that can provide from psychosocial support to education, economic integration. We're speaking really at a handful of countries which are mainly in the developed and Western world.
Yeah, you've got a report on the genocide survivors and that sort of thing, I know, through the UN. And I guess one of the things that I'm looking at is you're saying you don't look at the ethnic backgrounds of the individuals when you send them to other areas of the world or try to help. Yet the, immigration, refugees, CC here just indicated that they rely on the UNHCR's ability to identify vulnerable Yazidi women and children to have them come here. So how can you do that if you don't identify them?
We identify survivors of ISIS. That was the I understand, the motion of this parliament, and that was the cooperation that we had with both the Canadian government and the Iraqi authorities to identify survivors of ISIS, of Daesh, that needed, because of their extreme vulnerability, to be relocated to third countries such as Germany or Canada.
Mm-hmm. So Canada did rely on your ability to identify those people to get them out.
Of Daesh, yeah.
And so I guess I'm just wondering then if you can elaborate more on whether or not countries receive these folks, these particular individuals that have been through genocide, based on their ability to supply them with mental training, mental help, just because they're extremely traumatized. And you're saying, you're saying it's sometimes weeks before they get sought. Do they receive that kind of mental support the minute they land in Canada?
That's not for UNHCR to respond, because we are not involved into the settlement services upon arrival.
Okay.
I need to end you there. Sorry. Mr. Fredskatus.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not a regular a member of this committee, but I have, in a previous life, I did a great deal of research on the Yazidi and Kurdish issues and taught on those subjects as well. So I've been following this question closely. But I do want to ask you at the outset a general question. As you well know, the High Commissioner for Refugees was here yesterday, and Mr. Grandi was asked. I watched a few interviews with him, and the issue of asylum seekers came up in the following way. The questions posed to him by journalists made the point that because Canada has been dealing with asylum seekers, particularly in the summer months, that perhaps this would dampen the interest that Canadians have in continuing to welcome refugees. He made the point that Canada remains a welcoming country. But for your purposes and for his purposes and for the purposes of the work that we're doing here today, I think it's important to put the numbers into context. Yes, we did deal with some asylum issues in the summer months and continue to face that. But the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy, based on analysis that it has carried out looking at IRCC numbers, has come up with the following. In 2017, Canada will have 36,000 people here seeking asylum, which is a sizable number to be sure. But in 2008, that number was 37,000. In the year 2000, that number was 38,000. In 2001, that number was 45,000. So I want you to know, and certainly Mr. Grandi to know, that Canada has dealt with these challenges before, weathered the storm, so to speak, and we will do so again. More to the point, with respect to the question of the Yazidis and what's taking place in northern Iraq, we heard this morning testimony that Canada is involved actively in situations on the ground in terms of transitional justice in particular, and other approaches to conflict resolution. Mr. Grandi has made the point that, and you have made the point in other committees where you have testified, that resettlement is actually a very small part of the actual approach that we take when it comes to dealing with the displacement crisis that the world is facing, which, as you correctly said, is the worst that the world has seen since World War II. Could you speak specifically about transitional justice and the importance of that in helping societies repair? Because Canada is making it a focus in terms of our global efforts. I refer here to Northern Iraq specifically, but in other areas as well. And I think this is tremendously important in helping societies to heal so that those who have been displaced can perhaps return one day.
No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this reminder that indeed Canada had received in previous years similar number of asylum seekers. And I will go one step further to remind all honourable members of this committee that we have done an analysis to see whether the increase of asylum seekers had a correlation on the number of resettled refugees. And thankfully, Canada has not had this approach. I'd remain a partners on both fronts, valued partners on both fronts, and there is no correlation with an increase of asylum seekers means a decrease of resettled refugees. And we very much hope that in the years to come, as announced by Minister Hussein in the resettlement level, Canada will maintain the protection of asylum seekers and a larger program, hopefully, of resettled refugees. Transitional justice is an extremely important point in the case of communities which have been divided by the conflict, and especially when minorities feel that they have been particularly targeted by the conflict. Transitional justice is usually on a much longer time frame than the humanitarian operation, because it requires process of historical clarification, getting communities together to analyze what had happened. There's always an element of criminal responsibility in addition to traditional justice mechanisms, which will be very important in the case of Iraq and northern Iraq, especially for the Yazidi community, so that the justice is carried out in a very culturally appropriate manner. It's only when all those elements have been put in place that we think refugees and displaced will feel comfortable returning home and resuming their regular life. Yeah.
Chair, how much time for one more?
You don't.
I don't. Okay. We'll leave it there.
Mr. McGuire, I could give you 2 more minutes if you would like, or Mr. Schmall.
I think that, I guess that was the concern that I had, is just, Mr. Chair, thank you. I just wanted to follow up again with those numbers that you talked about. You're talking about less than 90,000 this year. Is that a consistent number, or has it been higher or lower in the past?
It's a decreased number compared to last year's of 43%. So we have almost lost half of the space.
So you had a number last year that was much higher, and how has that compared to other years?
Under the Obama administration, there was a target of 110,000 resettlement, which actually last year was actual number of arrival was around 90,000. And this year, under the Trump administration, the target is at 45 or 50,000 resettlement. So we have lost already 45,000 just from the U.S. allocated space. And a number of countries, in particular in Europe, because they had a massive increase of the asylum seekers since 2015, have also reduced their resettlement program.
And are there other areas of the world that you're looking at then to help make up that shortfall? Or is that, I know it may be a limited amount of countries, but can you help us with that?
In terms of resettlement countries?
Yes.
We are exploring, and Canada is helping us a lot in promoting the model, both the GAR and the privately sponsored, to see which other countries will be able to join. We have some prospects in Latin America, especially in the southern part of Latin America, with interest from countries like Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile. We are also working a little bit on countries like Japan, for example. But our main source countries for resettlement remain the United States, Canada as the second largest program, and a few European countries.
Yes, thank you. That's the end of my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Very good. I think that ends this part of the meeting, and I want to again thank Mr. Ruiz for being with us today. One issue that has come up in the questioning today that I just want to bring to the committee's attention for maybe a future meeting is the issue around translation and interpretation, community interpretation, and those issues, and whether or not we need more information on that as a topic, because we don't have that coming at our second meeting. And there is the Canadian Translation Terminologists and Interpreters Council, CITIC. There are other organizations which do particularly interpretation in non-widely disseminated languages, and whether or not this committee has done that work before, but it seemed to me that there were some questions around that we don't really know very much about availability and those things. Do you want us to do some looking into that? I'm looking particularly at the opposition because you both parties raised the issue, and yet we don't have that. Mr. Whalen?
I didn't get a chance to ask it, but I'm also interested in, within the medical profession itself, what level of language proficiency do we have from...
And there are specialized interpreters, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Both trained as well as community, and there's difference. Yeah. Those in the booth know it well. Ms. Kwan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, particularly within the medical profession, in the provinces, it's up to the province to determine whether or not they will provide for that translation. Often they don't, because it's a cost. It's a cost of the provincial government. Certainly in my province of British Columbia, they do not provide for that, although I think that they should. Very often people are asked to bring family members, and frankly, from the immigrant community, they often actually bring children, and they're somehow, deemed to required to tell their parents that they have some some illness that could be fatal. So from that perspective, you know, it will be a issue of determining a policy, if you will, both federal and provincial, in terms of where the contributions would come from. Because I think
I don't want to get into the debate about the issue. I just wanted to get a survey of whether it's of interest to the committee. Ms. Rampel.
It is of interest to us, Mr. Chair. I would also say that if we are going to continue the study on this, it might be useful to have an end user of these services actually give their experience. I'm not sure that we had enough time in this committee to allow that, and that would be my suggestion.
I'm getting a general nodding. We could look into it. We'll come back with a proposal on whether or not we need to do a third meeting on this particular topic around some of those issues. We're not making a decision today, just your information.
No, I'm fine with that, but my point is this, right? It's not about whether or not, it's not just about whether or not the service is available. You need to then actually incorporate it into that, the issue around how is it going to be resourced, because otherwise it's not really going to do us much good.
Good. Okay, the meeting is adjourned.